that was the part that like caught me off guard when I first heard the songs, because I heard them as instrumentals first.
Yeah.
And when it goes to Dan hits the octave pedal and goes from standard to a complete just jump down for the end of it, I
Yeah.
was like, what did I just fucking hear?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
laptop is currently sitting on a shoebox on my nightstand. So,
Well,
whatever works.
yeah. Fooled me. I would have never
Yeah.
thought unless you said it. So, cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. I'm joined today by probably the most unapologetic Predators fan in both the hardcore and everywhere in between. Got the tats to prove it as well.
Very hard to get this in camera when I'm like a mirrored image. I'm like, okay, which way do I move this? But there you go.
You're all good. Adam from Orthodox and Youth Collapse, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Glad we finally made this work.
100%. Yeah, we were trying to figure out things during the day, and unfortunately that didn't work for your work schedule. And then I had a solid week where my wife was out of the house, so the time flexibility was wide open. So glad we're sitting down. Definitely going to be chatting about Orthodox and Youth Collapse, two big bands that I would go to bat any day for. But before,
let's not call them big bands.
No, I would say
let's not get out of. Let's not go crazy here.
Before we get super into it, Adam, we got to do our scoped exposure bev check before we get too into it. So I wanted to keep this podcast as edge as possible. So I'm not recommending this drink, but I saw it and thought it was perfect for today. So it's called Sober Carpenter, and it's a non-alcoholic craft beer IPA.
Oh my God.
So we're going to give it a run, see how it is. I'll probably...
Sure. Probably tastes like shit, but it's okay.
Straight up, this is the very first like non-alcoholic beer that I'll be having. So I'm glad it's being documented on this podcast.
Yeah. It's funny how unimportant things can just be broadcasted to the internet.
Straight up. What do you got on your end?
I have something I would recommend, a Polar Seltzer, raspberry lime. There's no better sparkling drink out there.
That sounds very, very good. Well, cheers to you, my friend.
Yeah.
Hell
yeah, I wish mine was that tall.
Yeah, it is. If I hold it just at this and it crops it off, it'll be about the same.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, don't
yeah, just
don't show me up here, man.
Well, Adam, that's actually not too bad. Anyways, before we get super into it, I'm a firm believer as far as like context is super important, how it comes to, the bands and the different comps and just different things that influence people to get into the bands and the positions that they are in music. So let's go back in time. Give me Adam's hardcore origin story, metalcore origin story, whatever you want to call it. And obviously, you being from Nashville and having, from some of the research I've done for this podcast, had a pretty rich upbringing when it comes to just being surrounded by music. So take it away and tell the people at home the hims and haws.
Short summary of the whole upbringing with music is just that my parents were in the country music industry. They were producers, publishers, songwriters. Not only my parents, but my grandfather, all of which were in the country music industry. And that in Nashville is the stereotype, but it's there for a reason, because in the late 80s, early 90s, when they were heavily involved, is when everything was flourishing. So they signed acts like Joe Diffie, Keith Urban, Tim McGraw, Kenny Chesney, John Michael Montgomery. It's a pretty ridiculous list of artists. And if you like country music and you're listening to this podcast and you haven't listened to all of the names that I just mentioned, just turn this off now because you're fucking late on your homework and you need to get back to what's real there. But outside of that, in terms of my musical journey, I'd say the first like heavy bands I heard were in huge thanks to Tony Hawk Pro Skater. As I've said many times before, without that game, I genuinely like I was already like into skateboarding, but that made it like jump in, and that only dove me deeper into all sorts of different alternative cultures that I probably wouldn't. Because being out here, especially in a time where the internet was like dial up, and I used it for video games, like shitty little online video games. Like you didn't have a way, you didn't have the access that we have so easily now to everything. So like if I wanted to find something, I had to actually go looking for it, and I probably wouldn't have done that because my household was very country related. Like they just didn't understand why people were screaming. They just didn't get it. Didn't understand. So if I didn't have that drive and that like culture around me to back it up, I probably wouldn't have pushed through and forced my mom to read lyrics of records because she had to read that to make sure it was okay for me to listen to. Like that's the kind of house I was in. First like heavy CD was Hybrid Theory from Linkin Park. Probably first like alternative CD anything was Good Charlotte, Young and the Hopeless. And yeah, from there, Volume 3 Subliminal Verses from Slipknot. I actually had all of like the other records that had all the really bad shit on it on my iTunes, but they were just under different artist names so that they wouldn't get found. And
like who would you rename? Like what were some of those like call it aliases on your iTunes? Because I remember doing that, and I just remembered like just sometimes you would have to do the work to like make sure everything was nice and clean.
I think I just changed Slipknot to Corey Taylor because it sounded like a country artist.
That's really, really funny.
Korn, I don't think there was any suspicion because it's called Korn.
Yeah.
I don't honestly remember the other ones because it would literally, I would have like weird, a lot of them were just like, I would download it illegally. So half the shit was just like .7634M whatever. And I was just like, oh, this just looks like some weird file that ended up on the computer somehow. And, back then nobody knew how computers fucking worked.
Right.
Like we just were like, oh, that's there. We probably shouldn't touch it because it's either gonna put a virus out there or it's supposed to be there. That was like
right. Or explode. One of those three.
Our understandings of computers at the time was like a dog's understanding of like sit. If I sit down, maybe I'll get a treat, maybe I won't. That's like how the whole thing was for us at the time. So most of the time I got away with everything. There was one point I think I forgot to change something and I got caught. And she was like, oh, what all is in here? And I was like, it's just that. And then we were fine. But
you're like, what's the song called People Equal Shit? And you're like, nothing.
No, not that one. That's fine. But yeah, from there, Christian metalcore in the late 2000s was huge out here. So my first heavy show was Haste the Day, Scary Kids Scaring Kids, Drop Dead Gorgeous, Gwen Stacy, and then the opener was at the time a local band called As Hell Retreats that then went all over the place. Grew up with like them being a huge influence, as well as A Plea for Purging, which is probably one of the most underrated heavy bands of all time.
Hard agree on that.
Yeah. Oh my God. Another band. Here's the thing. Plea for Purging gets a really bad rap because a lot of their merch was goofy, a lot of their videos was goofy, and they were on Face Down Records. Straight up, if you've just written them off for that, like go listen to The Marriage of Heaven and Hell because there's not many records heavier than that record. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's packed full of just riffs that like make like a lot of bands that are like call it metalcore bands nowadays are just like you are copying someone's homework from a long time ago that you didn't even know.
Yeah. About. Yep. I mean, that's why literally Mike, Orthodox's drummer, has a Plea tattoo, and Andy is on our new record. And so that was like, we had a part that sounded like a part that would be on their Depravity record, and I texted him. I was like, "Yo, what if I get Andy on a song?" He's like, "Fuck yeah, do it." So
Which
like 2 weeks
song
later,
is
and
that?
it's The Presence.
Oh,
The first
okay.
the first yelling vocal where he says no conclusion to this curse through like that whole little stompy 2-step type thing
Yeah.
is Andy Atkins from Complete the Person.
Wow. Shout out to Andy. Shout out to
Yeah.
fatcore. All that good shit.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, that was like the world I grew up in, was like those, Scream the Prayer started their tour here every year and things like that. So not the hardest of backgrounds. But eventually, as every kid that goes to shows all the time, I was just hungrier and hungrier for more and more. And my taste kind of moved over towards liking hardcore music a lot more. I think the first band I ever saw that was a hardcore band that I really connected with was a band called Another Mistake. You can now find their singer singing for an incredible band named Inclination, as well as another badass band called Constraint.
Yeah.
Constraint is pretty much Another Mistake with breakdowns. That's like what Constraint sounds like. So,
yeah.
But yeah, also another band, Another Mistake. Go listen to it. It's fucking awesome. And you can literally, you can honestly trace like a lot of my stage presence and weird like groovy, dancey move type things back to like me just admiring the shit out of how Tyler works the stage. Yeah. And to this day, even though he's like 55 or something like that, he's not actually, he just is beat up like he is. But like to this day, I love watching him perform. And so that was a huge thing for me getting into hardcore, was that band. And from there, I was the typical late teens, early 20s kid, where every band that had played a show outside of their own state, and even some that hadn't, if they had an EP out, I'd listen to it 2 or 3 times and had an opinion on it. So that's just where I was, and went to every show that I possibly could, would call out of work for it if I had to. And eventually, Orthodox was started. It sounded originally like if Foundation was really fast all the time. And eventually we kind of like realized that we didn't really grow up listening to hardcore music, which is fine. You don't have to have always listened to hardcore to enjoy hardcore music. You don't have to it definitely helps to understand where the new bands get what they're coming from, because there's just a level of appreciation to the idea of like, wow, these dudes are the ones that started how this sounds. But you don't necessarily have to love that. That's not the idea. But we grew up loving like new metal and heavy bands like that. And you can start to hear us to get a little into that on our EP, Give Me a Reason, just like a little bit. But then we signed to Unbeaten, and they were like, put out an LP, and we're like, okay, sure. And we just kind of started to dive into what we really wanted to do, Tyler Williams and I. And it came out with a really different sound from like anything really hardcore related. Still very much rooted in it, but a lot weirder. And I wouldn't call it a hardcore record because of that. But that is pretty much my quick synopsis of how I came to where I am with music and hardcore.
Yeah, and I was rewatching the interview that you did with Caleb from the Serial playlist.
Yeah, dude, that was one of my favorite interviews. That dude, so funny.
Oh, he's so great. He actually came on the pod. I think it was like right when we were kind of going online when it came to doing these podcasts. But
cool.
Yeah, very, very, very sweet guy. Just had a good little I don't want to say gimmick, but like, what's the good way of saying that? Essentially, a really good idea as far as like just putting a very basic idea into the flesh and surrounding music around it. So.
Oh yeah.
But you were
absolutely.
So going back to that, you did an interview with him, and I was like rewatching that, and you were mentioning on how Orthodox started in 2013, and then he cut to, I guess, one of your very first shows or something. I was like, this doesn't sound.
No, it's not very first shows. It was our very first tour.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I was kind of just like, this doesn't sound like anything that I think when I think of Orthodox sonically or musically.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you guys have definitely kind of come through the ringer as far as like, and I've seen that with other bands even locally here. Like there's a bands who are like, you know, playing hardcore shows and they're like, we actually all really like death metal, so let's put out a death metal record, and then it's like it's sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't that's one thing that's semi frustrating with heavy music. It's kind of like you look at artists like Childish Gambino, who put out Camp, and then he put out Because of the Internet, which is the one that like really took off, which are both like very cool experimental hip hop albums. And then he put out it's my favorite album of his, and of course I can't remember what it's called.
Childish Gambino. Pull it from the ethos.
Well, the third record is basically a soul record. Like there's no hip hop about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing hip hop about it aside from like there's a couple of trap drums here and there. It is a straight up soul record. And then the record Awaken My Love, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And then the new record he just put out is like mainly almost like house music half the time. So, but nobody complains when he jumps from I just did this, I want to do this now. Now I want to do this. But in like heavy music, if you put out 10 songs and they don't all fit in the same room, people think that you don't have an idea of what you're doing. And it's like, actually, I have a good idea of what I'm doing. I'm just doing more than one thing.
Right.
And I never understood why people get on to people when it's like, oh, this new record doesn't sound anything like the last one. Well, no shit, that's the last one.
Right.
Like,
no.
why do you want the same thing twice? You can, if you want the hardcore, like, here's the thing again, is like hardcore metal music, band to band, a lot of them sound very similar. If you want that last record, go find the other 4 bands that sound like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of how that goes.
Yeah. No,
but
I never really
understood that.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings up a really interesting point. Like, you know, you could look at a couple bands that have kind of done call it the same thing with different layers of skin. Like I think of like Power Trip as being a good example as far as always kind of being that just like balls to the wall thrash music.
Yeah.
And but I agree with you that there's a lot more rustling of the feathers when a band wants to go in a direction that is maybe a little bit softer or really, really heavier, not just straight up hardcore. I think maybe one of the only bands that have done that in a successful manner is like Angel Dust, because when they came out, it was like, this is like a punk hardcore band, and then now it's like most of the time there's like, I would say there's probably more like lighter acoustic guitars than there is like heavy electric guitars on that. So
that the thing that makes that transition easier for people to swallow is because even though there were parts that were like pissed off on the first couple of records, it was always a happy feeling.
Yeah.
I'd say the band has done it most successfully in what I can hear and what I've listened to is Ceremony.
Yeah. That
band went from being the most pissed off band, one of the most pissed off bands I've ever heard, to being a straight up like smooth, easy punk band.
Right.
And people complain about it all the time to the point where I'm pretty sure they had a shirt that says like, I miss the old Ceremony or some shit like that. And I'm like, that's fucking great.
Yeah.
But what's crazy about them is they'll like play shows where they play mostly like their punk stuff, and then like towards the end they'll throw like Cursed in there.
Right. And
like the shit that's going to get people hurt if they don't know what's going on kind of thing. Like
right.
That to me is really cool, because it's the prime example of like, just because something works doesn't mean, just because like you did one thing one way at a certain time doesn't mean you have to do exactly that or what people expect of the next thing. Mm-hmm. You know, at the end of the day, if I write a record, I'm writing what I want to write. It's not going to be what I think you're going to enjoy, because that's not the point, especially of this genre.
Yeah.
If I'm writing pop music, yeah, my hook is based on who I'm singing to. But otherwise, I don't want this to sound like crass or like I don't really appreciate anyone's ever supported my music. But as I'm writing something, I could give a fuck what anybody else is going to think about it. If I think it's sweet, I think it's sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, and that gets into the whole like quality subjective nature of things, and like you really have to stay the course of like, I'm writing the music that I want to and that I like find fulfillment in, not like, oh, I think, this style of music is really like popular, so like we might do better as a band, or like I've always wanted to, do stuff. And it's just like sit down with your guitar, your drums, your lyric sheet, and just write. And if it's a rap album, maybe you do a rap album. If it's something that's totally left field, like being able to play up on those and kind of fuck the judgment of anyone else that's on the outside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to hear Adam have some kind of non-metal music fill in the blank in the near future. I don't know if that's behind the scenes or just wishful thinking.
I mean, I would love to do that. I just don't know when I'd have time. But
yeah, that's fair. Busy guy, and took a lot to get this podcast down. But to transition, I would say, like, I guess Orthodox would be your main band. You guys put out a release at the very end of last year.
Start of this year.
I think.
February.
I think the start of that happened in at the end of the year. But yeah, you guys put out "Let Us Take Its Course," full length on Unbeaten Records. I feel like you guys, on a music side of things, there's a lot of bands who are like, oh yeah, we're influenced from like, Slipknot and those kind of things. But I feel like on the guitars and vocal side, like I feel like you guys actually are allowed to say that, because it just has that fast, like just ridiculous, like just metal, like pure metal kind of sound to it.
Thank you.
And there's definitely like a lot of songs that you guys wanted to, like, in an LP, like maybe these aren't going to be like, call it live songs, but they kind of are a key piece of the puzzle in the entirety of the record. So maybe just talk to me on the reflective nature of like it being out for, I guess, like almost a year now, and just like what are the songs that have really gotten people's attention? What are the ones that you're most proud of, even if they didn't get, call it, the recognition that you deserve, because you're just proud that you took the time to do a song of that nature on that record?
It's hard to reflect on it because, like, I was literally just talking to Matt from Boundaries on my way home from work today about how he was filling in for Varials on the last tour that we did, which was Spite, Varials, I Am, Us, and a band from Australia. And literally that ended 6 months ago. Like, we had been home for 6 months, and we got sent home in the middle of that. And that tour, we literally released that record on day 2 of that tour. So it's been a whole lot of like waiting and like hoping things are going to get better to where we can actually get out and really work the record. But nothing's really any better yet. And so it's hard to say, like, in reflection, how I feel about it, because it almost feels like it's flopped just because we're not able to keep putting it in people's faces. And with the attention span that we all have these days, it's kind of hard to keep someone listening to the same songs if they're not going to get the chance to hear it in front of them. Yeah. But to answer what I'm most proud of, I would say my favorite songs when I listen to it now, I really like the song Cut, just because I'm the biggest System of a Down fan that I know. And that song to me was as close to a toxicity that I think this band could get away with. I really like the song Look at Me, because I think it encompasses all of our inspirations in a way that's very upfront, and there's a lot of room for reaction in that song, but it's not like the typical, like, here's this slow build up for this breakdown where you're going to fight over it. It's like a lot more of like you get a genuine reaction and a genuine movement out of somebody out of what's being played, which was a lot of fun to see once we started playing it live. Let It Take Its Course, the title track, has the coolest breakdown this band will ever write with the like little bell thing.
The minute that kicked in when I saw you guys in Winnipeg, I was like, okay, this is the song. It is so
I mean, that's
sick.
literally, we wrote that, and the whole idea, I mean, even now I listen to it, was like, wow, we did a pretty good job with it, because the guitar is constantly in full time while the drums are always, aside from like a small section, in halftime. But there's not really a heavy part played in it that's played exactly how you anticipate it to be played. So like the breakdown with the bell, I remember we wrote it as like what would it sound like if Gojira was dragging their knuckles? That's like what the mindset of that was. And then like the very ending breakdown with the big bend is like played with the offbeat hi-hat, as opposed to being straightforward and driven, which just kind of adds a whole different weird groove element that we hadn't done before. So that song, to me, it just feels really cool to have a song where I personally am still satisfied with how my vocals sound, which is kind of rare. And then also musically, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of shit that has been done before, but not done this way. So that's a cool thing to because I mean, you put out a metal record in 2020, every riff you have, somebody can be like, well, that sounds like this from this band from then. But like I feel like that song in itself is like, okay, I can't really think of much, if anything, that actually sounds like how that song does.
Yeah, and mad shout out to Mike, one of just the sickest drummers on that front.
He's a fucking beast.
Yeah,
he cracked me up how like he showed up as like, yeah, there's some songs I don't really have down all the way, and then he knocked everything out in like maybe 10 hours, if that. That dude, it's frustrating how even when he fucks up, he's still in the pocket. Like, he just is always right on the click. It's insane.
Yeah.
And then live, he's very consistent.
Yeah, it's been a big juggling of knowing what I can still like post during these times, because I'm essentially been out of like live show content for a long,
you're having new
time.
content.
Yeah. So originally what I was doing is I was kind of picking certain songs from like a drum cam session as like, oh, I'll just post those. But then when this quarantine hit, I was like, maybe I'll just release the entire ones. And I think Mike was one of the very first ones I posted, because literally I could have picked any song that he had done, because there was, there's always going to be those things that happen in a live setting. But like you said, just being able to recover from those and what is that in jousting? Parrying? Like, just crazy on how...
Jousting?
Or not jousting, but...
Fencing.
What?
Wait, what are you talking about?
Well, like, parrying, is that not like you kind of deflect and then you kind of move around? I think of like an Assassin's Creed where you're just like countering the entire time. But I don't know if parrying's the right word.
Is jousting not when you're on a horse riding towards somebody else?
That is. I think I meant sword fighting. Same era, just
okay.
I'm like, on feet versus
how
on a horse.
How the fuck are we on a horse all of a sudden? Okay.
Sorry, we're just snaking our way through.
Yeah, sure, whatever. We'll make it to the finish line eventually.
Adam's like, all right, let's get it wrapped up. So Orthodox is pretty upfront about being a straight edge band. And I had a question just on the whole topic of straight edge, because I think nowadays, that moral identity of a band, it doesn't really matter what the music is. Like, there's super heavy straight edge bands, there's like really classic New York style straight edge bands, and kind of everything in between. Because you guys have been a band for so long, was that kind of, were you kind of the fish out of water when you were like, oh yeah, we're a straight edge band, and then you're like, what tuning are you guys in?
I mean, looking back, it definitely was a niche at the time, because we were like a thrashy, heavy, metallic straight edge hardcore band. And really, at the time that we were getting started, there wasn't that much of a straight edge scene like nationwide. The video that you saw on Caleb's interview is actually from Edge Day and Foundation headlined, and that was in Atlanta and everything. And so that, again, that was huge influence on us was Foundation. And if you ever hear our first EP, you have to dig for it at this point, but it sounds just like that. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we never set out to sound too much like anybody else. So we were already kind of aware that no matter what we do or identify with, it's going to be kind of our own thing, just because that's who we were. We weren't like trying to be different. It's just like, we're a bunch of fucking weird kids from middle of nowhere, Tennessee. Like, it's not going to be the same energy that you get out of, say, an Atlanta band or a Florida hardcore band or a New York band. But I don't know that it necessarily like was a bad thing. It just I guess because I never noticed, I never assumed anybody else noticed.
Right.
Most of the time we were fighting people off from thinking we were a Christian band because of our name. So like, that was my main thing, was like, I don't give a fuck how you feel about straight edge, but like, we're not some corny Christian band at this point.
Yeah.
So like, I remember, what band was it? I think it was Bent Life. We had literally played with Bent Life like 4 times in a year. And then we played with each other at Gateway to the West Fest on that same first tour. And Andy, their singer, was like, "Oh, this Orthodox band was so fucking badass, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, dude, we played together like a ton. And he told someone, like, "Yeah, I just always thought they were some like Christian metal band." And I was like, "Oh, I guess that's the thing people think. All right."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I never noticed any real like hindering of any sort because of it.
Yeah.
But that could just be me not paying enough attention, to be honest. It's definitely something that I feel like we definitely meet with more controversy now that we are playing to not as many like hardcore crowds as we once did. Like, we've done like a deathcore tour where every night we were getting offered weed because they just had no idea what it meant. That's just how far from that culture they were. To being, on tours where people do get it, but they just don't agree with it, or they've had bad experiences with it, or so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's ever, to answer your question now as long as I possibly could, I don't think it's ever injured us in my mind.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting point that you brought up, just as far as like you guys may be playing a little bit more on the metal side of things, like, that not only is that reflective of, the bands, but also like the venues. Like, some hardcore shows are like, yep, this is in a all ages venue, so there's no drugs or booze or anything like that. But metal, you can have kind of everything in between, as far as like playing a bar gig or things like that. Oh, my doggo just kind of freaked out for a second. But yeah, like I think that is interesting that you're a little bit more in that realm where you maybe see that a bit more versus like, hey, we're playing this youth crew show, and it's at a skateboard shop, and
Yep.
there's a pizza in the back for everyone. Like,
yeah, I mean, we've literally played that exact show. So like, I know exactly what you mean. And it is very different going from, I mean, we haven't played many small shows like that over the last couple of years. And like, we're very fortunate to have gotten to play to the size of the crowds that we have been. But it is a very big difference going from like, there's a place in Indiana called the Royal Skate Shop, which is just, where is that? It's like close to Gary. So it was like a weird area to start with. Those shows were fucking scary violent to the point where like, even being the band, I'm like, yo, I'm about to get nailed right now, like just knocked hard. Right. And then going from that to playing, we were fortunate enough to play a sold out show at the Masquerade on this last tour in Hell, which is like a 500 cap room, and there's a barricade. Yeah. It was fucking weird, and it's crazy to have played and grinded and played so many shows in the size of this room, and being, where I can smell this guy's sweat. And also that's almost more challenging because like if this dude right here isn't fucking with it, I can't look away from that.
Right.
If there's somebody in the huge room that doesn't care and whatever, they're looking at their phone, I can be like, okay, whatever. There's 400 other people here that are digging it or whatever. But like if there's a dude who's just like obviously not about it, it is so much more just in here in a small room than in a big place.
Yeah. Like, bro,
which
if you're
makes
not
those,
into it, could you like go to the back of the room or go
yeah.
to
Oh my God. We played a little like rec center in Alabama at the end of our tour with I Am and Boundaries last year. And like Alabama is a neighboring state for us. We do really well there because we've been playing there for 6 years at that point. Like we have a lot of friends there and a lot of a following there. And so like kids are often really stoked to see us. And this room was packed, like packed. And but there was no stage. So it was one of those where like I can only see this. And this dude wearing some like pop punk jersey just didn't give a fuck. He literally was just the whole time. Everyone around him was like jumping, freaking out, piling on. He just did not care. I finally just was like, fuck this. And I just like shoved him to the side. I was like, go away. Like, what is this?
Get your A Day to Remember swag out of here and let me do my thing.
Oh, I would have been fine if it was A Day to Remember swag. It was some weird, like, I don't even remember what it was.
It's like an older Victory Records pop punk band, probably.
Yeah, whatever. This dude was like neck tat, face tats, like I'm wearing this soft band shirt to be ironic thing. I'm just like, okay. Y'all still exist, I guess.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't remember what the original question was.
No, we were getting off topic. I think
we were talking about pizza in the back.
Yeah,
that's
pizza in the back.
Yep.
To hard transition though, because you know, well, I will say before we transition to say that your latest album was a flop. I feel like that doesn't give you any credit because that's been an album that I've been constantly repeating, and even when I shared I guess like the flashback of when you guys did play Winnipeg and we crossed paths for the first time, so many people were like, "Whoa, this is my first time hearing about this band." So I think that was like a huge milestone record for you guys, and I'm not trying to say that just to pump your tires.
Well, thank you.
And I hope that you get a chance to really crush those songs live in the way that you guys have always hoped to.
Thank you. And saying it was a flop is a reach because we did gain a whole new fan base with it and so on and so forth. But it just, I think it's just really hard to listen to it knowing what our plans for the year were going to be.
Yeah.
Like the tour we would have gotten home from a month ago was supposed to be the craziest tour we'd ever been asked to be a part of. And it just, the world shut down. So it's literally, I was talking to Matt about how I had this podcast interview tonight and I was like, dude, I don't care if he never posts this interview. I just want to talk to someone about like music stuff because there's so much uncertainty in the music world that I literally have like just kind of put it on the back burner because I don't want to constantly bum myself out of like, well, you might get to tour again. We'll see, like it's just one of those weird things where it's been in the back of my mind to where I'm so stoked to be here and talk about this kind of thing just because usually it's all I talk about for a month and a half out of every summer. Right. And I didn't get to do that this year. So like it's been a very strange, I mean, I don't have to tell you or anybody listening, it's been a weird year.
Yeah.
But
well,
yeah,
we're very happy to have you. Glad you were excited about this podcast, despite me fumbling sometimes on some of these question transitions. But to hard transition, I would love to talk about another project that you're involved in. And again, I'm not trying to say this to give you a big ego check. I think Youth Collapse is probably in my top 10 new bands of this year as far as favorites. So can you please tell me how that came to be? And maybe clarify like who does what in the band, because
Yeah.
there's people on the engineering side, and then like people who are just ripping the fattest solos side. And then you're actually playing drums on this release.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
So
break it down. Give us the origin behind the scenes.
so for Orthodox, Sounds of Loss and Let It Take Its Course were both partially produced, mixed and mastered, engineered by Daniel Colombo, who also helped me write almost all of this last record, because after Sounds of Loss, Tyler, who was the other sole contributor of the band, joined Counterparts, which tours 500 days a year. So he couldn't do both. And we were like, look, go be a fucking rock star. That's badass. So Dan actually moved to Nashville, and we wrote most of that record. So Dan also played in the Mongoloids, as well as Suburban Scum, other New Jersey bands, even though he never at any point lived in New Jersey. I really don't know how that came to be. But Dan and I have become very close over the years. He's one of my favorite people. And he sent me what ended up becoming New Form, which is the first Youth Collapse EP.
Okay.
Probably over a year and a half ago. But what's crazy is it was recorded instrumentally for 5 years ago.
What is happening? Seriously?
Yeah. So it was actually originally supposed to be the final Mongoloids EP. Dan wrote and recorded all of it himself with he does all the strings, and then he had the drummer for his old deathcore band, Grenade Face, play drums on that.
Okay. First, can we just say Grenade Face is one of the best band names ever?
Dude, if you can find their music, it is fittingly face melting. It's fucking ridiculous.
Face imploding. Anyways, keep going.
So he sent me that forever ago because it just never got worked on. Greg, the singer of the Mongoloids, it just never worked out. And so originally I was going to sing on it, and we were going to release it as a new band. And then at some point, Greg was like, hey, I need to get a music fix going. Do we still have those songs? And he was like, yeah. And Greg was like, I don't know what the hell I want to write about. Do you have anybody you would recommend that could help me write some of these songs? And so that's how I came into the picture officially. Was Dan was like, hey, Greg wants you to write some of these songs, like lyrically, and help him with some of the vocal patterns because he's felt out of practice, which is ironic because the title track, or what's the title track? The song Youth Collapse is actually the one song that Greg wrote in full by himself. And that's, to me, lyrically, the sickest one, to where I wrote 90 to 95% of the lyrics for 6 Feet, Binds in Time, and Set in My Ways. And so I didn't pay too much attention to the song Youth Collapse because I knew that Greg already had it finished. Sure. And so I literally was doing backup vocals. And that's when I was for the first time reading the line, well, it doesn't matter, let your youth collapse. And I was like, yo, I literally stopped, like, that's the fucking band name. I think we're going to call it Orchestrated or something, like in regards to a Mongoloid song. It's like, no, fuck that. This band is going to be called Youth Collapse. That's the sickest thing I've heard in a long time. And so, yeah, that's kind of how the whole picture came about. Was Greg needed a little support on writing a little bit. And then I just kind of literally wrote songs how I would imagine the Mongoloids would write it, and would like I would go back and listen to old Mongoloid songs and kind of picture how Greg sings things. And then I would do a soft, like actual singing version of it for him to understand where my vocal pattern was. And then he would go in and make it his own whole different monster. Yeah. It's kind of like the idea of like you go to a tattoo artist with something in mind, and like for instance, was like, hey, give me a coffin with 3 X's and a Reaper scythe. And this came out of it. Like, just my mind does not conceptualize right. that.
Yeah.
But that's like how it is with Greg, is like I give him like this rough edit of something, and then he'll go in and just knock it out of the park into the next field and knock someone unconscious with the ball. Like, it's insane how, especially with the song we just did, The Itch,
Yeah.
That's the first song I did on drums, and I wrote most of that song and sent it to him. Was like, hey, I was like, there's a lot of cool things you could do in this, and he was like, I don't know, man, I'm nervous. And then he sent it back, and we're like, dude, this is the best vocal take you've ever done, like hands down. So that's kind of just what the dynamic is. Is it is Dan and I sit down and write a song at his computer, like how we did the Orthodox record, where most of the time it's me humming a riff and Dan, being the instrumental genius that he is like, oh, we could do this with that, and just noodles all over the place with it.
Yeah.
And then we'll program the drums there. I go home and practice said drums and then go into the studio to record that. And then Greg goes to, the person who has a huge hand also in the vocal production is Taylor Young, who does Twitching Tongues. I can't even begin the list of bands that dude is.
Just go to his Instagram and scroll, and you'll.
I mean, yeah. Dude has a monster catalog of artistic adventures. Just so many good bands, but also great vocal producer, it turns out, because holy shit, I mean, Greg has recorded all the vocals with him because he's in LA. So that is all it is right now, is just me, Greg, and Dan. We've got other people in mind for when things pick up that are for like playing shows. We've been talking with Austin Evans, who plays guitar in Orthodox. And then also Zack Witcher, who was the original bassist in Orthodox, who, ironically, if you have one of those like rest in peace Mongoloids posters where it's like Greg jumping really high and it says Mongoloid years they were a thing, in the bottom right corner you can see me and Zack like freaking out against the stage because that was taken in Atlanta. And so I was like, how funny is it that like Zack and I were both huge Mongoloid fans, literally drove to New Jersey for their final show. And now we're kind of in it. But
Mongoloids V2, kind of.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of where that's the whole thing of Youth Collapse, is that right there. And we've got tons of other ideas. It's just a matter of when Dan and I have not only the time, but enough like mental bandwidth to get back together and get some more songs written for it. But hopefully, in theory, we'll have something else out this year, or at least get in to record something this year. But we're not, I can't put any real
timelines or promises in that. But like I remember vividly you sharing that and then just being like, oh yeah, this looks interesting. I'll give it a listen. And just like 6 Feet like is as good as an intro track as it could be as an outro track. It just there's no lead in, it just right to business right away, and then just this beautiful fade out. Like I was listening to it today and I was like, man, this could close the whole EP, but the fact that it opens almost makes it better in some cases.
I love how our track order on that goes, honestly. Literally when I thought of the like 6 Feet hook at the end, I was kind of pissed that I wouldn't be the one singing it, if I'm being all the way real, because I'm like, I probably will never write anything that catchy ever again, because it's just so fucking simple. And Greg actually was like, I don't know if I want to like sing this because it's such a heavy part. I was like, dude, if you don't fucking sing that, you are just throwing that out the window. You have to do it.
It's
you
so
have to
epic
sing it
with the actual vocals.
So exactly. I was like, dude, just please. And he did it. And I mean, that's one of my favorite, still after all that we've done, that's one of my favorite parts that we have. But when I say all that we've done, after the other song that we did, but like the way that it goes from that into Binds in Time, where it goes straight into a little Phil thing, and then Youth Collapse starts with Greg, and Greg does such insane vocals over that you don't even realize how heavy that part actually is. But that part's awesome. And then it has a weird like dance. That was the part that like caught me off guard when I first heard the songs, because I heard them as instrumentals first. And when it goes to Dan hits the octave pedal and goes from standard to a complete just jump down for the end of it, I was like, what did I just fucking hear? but then the whole, set in my ways is as straight edge of a song as I could write. And I had been wanting to use uh, originally the idea was like, I'll always be straight edge. And if you have any doubts, you keep my name out of your fucking mouth. And that's kind of corny. So I was like, what can I do that like still uses that, but isn't as dumb and lame? And so the whole set in my ways thing, I was like, that's perfect. Cause we're all like late 20s, early 30s, and we're all still straight edge. So this is it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's Youth Collapse. Oh, and then The Itch is written about skateboarding. So
The Itch is like, there's a ton of bangers on that One Scene Unity comp, but I was like,
that comp is insane.
But it was funny because I know a lot of my friends that I was like, you need to listen to this Youth Collapse band, and like 9 times out of 10, you're like, listen to this band. Yeah, I'll check it out, and then they don't check it out because of X, Y, Z reasons. But I think when that came out and a lot of the bands that they would frequent were on it, they were like, yeah, I'll listen to everything. They're like, yo, this Youth Collapse band is sick. I'm like, yeah, I told you to listen like so many months ago.
That comp put us from like having like 300 monthly listeners on Spotify to like now we consistently have like 1,600, which is still very small potatoes. But I'm like, that comp alone got us like 1,300 new people listening to the band.
Yeah, definitely go check that comp out if you haven't. Just a plethora of just amazing hardcore all throughout it.
Shout out to Hangman for sure.
100%. I need to ask before we move on to kind of the final thing I want to hit on. Whose call was it to drop the solo on the solo vocal line on the first song on the EP? Like, should I say solo before the guitar solo kicks in?
Wait, what? I'm confused what you're talking about.
So in
where he says solo.
Yes.
He actually says the word solo.
Yeah.
That was 100% Greg. 100% Greg. Ooh, solo. Yeah, that was Greg.
I was like, it's still one of the best parts because I've seen that live and it's like, oh yeah, that's funny. But to actually like put it in writing, so to speak, was like all the respect and love for that. So the last thing I wanted to hit on here, Adam, is obviously you're a big Nashville guy. You're repping your ink at the very beginning of this podcast when you guys played Winnipeg. Before you guys even started shitting on the Winnipeg Jets immediately, and I was like, damn, this guy is like very, very into hockey. And I don't see a lot of people in hardcore specifically who are like rep their teams kind of as hard as I've seen you. So like, has that always just been like your upbringing? Like, no, you cheer for Nashville. You don't pick a team. You cheer for the home team. What was the kind of the seeds that were planted for that?
So the Predators have been around since '98. They were pretty much dog shit for a long time. They were like very bad, like to the point where like most everyone in Nashville hates the Golden Knights because why did you get to pick this fucking awesome team and we just now started making the playoffs? Like, kind of fuck you a little bit. Yeah. So like growing up, I was much more of a huge baseball fan. Cubs have always been my team. Baseball and basketball, you had Sammy Sosa and Michael Jordan. Those were like my 2 favorite athletes. And then we got the Titans in football around the same time. I think '99, went to the Super Bowl immediately. That was our first year as a team. We went to the Super Bowl, lost, haven't been back since. But that was kind of where I was like, oh, this is badass. And I was 6 or 7 at the time. So I started really following football too. And hockey, Nashville's hockey scene was not there for a while. We almost got moved. The team almost got sent to, I don't remember where we were sent, but we were supposed to be transitioned out of Nashville at some point, but a petition was signed or something happened. I don't know what the hell happened, but people were like, oh, we're going to lose this team if we don't start supporting it. And then people started really showing up. And it also really helps to follow a team when they're not losing. If you got 82 games in a year and you're losing most of them, it's kind of hard to keep up with it. But around the time they started getting pretty decent was actually around the time that I started working in a restaurant on a street called Broadway in Nashville,
Yep.
1 block away from the arena. So I was constantly out there. Like when there was game nights, we'd have so many people in the gold jerseys everywhere, and I just really liked the atmosphere of it. And also Nashville, how much is like a balcony seat at a Jets game?
Ooh,
Oh
that's
fuck, you're in
crazy.
Canadian. Damn it, that sucks. Canadian money is the most like upsetting thing in the world to me. It just literally makes my head hurt so bad, and I don't know why. I think it's just because I've had to deal with it so little, and I'm not good at math as it is.
Oh,
So like doing merch in
essentially,
Winnipeg, I was like, oh my god.
right now it's like almost. I think we're 60 cents on a dollar for you. So it's like I don't know
Okay,
why you got
that I can
anything bad to
almost
say,
do.
because you guys can really roll in it when you guys are coming up here.
Well, anyways, how much is like a ticket for a game for you guys?
Um, it's changed. I want to. I'm gonna do some research right now.
Let me just. It doesn't even honestly matter. We'll just put it into perspective for you. For the first like 3-4 years that I was really becoming a Preds fan, I could go to a game for $15.
Right. Yeah.
And there's not a bad seat in Bridgestone Arena because it was built for concerts. So instead of where you have most sports places are built this way, it was built up. And so
Oh,
the
okay.
acoustics in it are insane, which is partially why we are frequently noted as the loudest arena in sports. It's just because the literal acoustics of that place are astounding. So that's where I started really being able to go, was because I was like, oh, damn, Tuesday night game. If I use the Preds app, I can get these seats for $15 with fees. I'm paying $40, and then I go to the game and have a great time. And we were doing really well.
Yeah.
So that was kind of where I was at. And then once we got in the playoffs, I was like, oh, I'll spend the money to go to the playoffs game. I actually got to see game 3 of the series where we swept the Blackhawks, which was awesome. I was right over the goal when Kevin Fiala did his little backhand to win in overtime. So like, I don't, to say that I've like always been a Preds fan is like, yeah, that's always been the hockey team I supported, but I wasn't always a huge hockey fan.
Yeah.
But then once I was, it was kind of like, oh, this is awesome. And also this is the sickest spectator sport of all time. I think the only reason it's not as big as like football and basketball and such is partially because it's not as accessible. It's a very expensive game to play to begin with because a pair of skates is not cheap. But then also Americans just love instant gratification. Like they want to see the 100-mile-an-hour fastball. They want to see the 3-point shot. They want to see the big tackle every play.
Yeah.
But like there's something magical about like in hockey when you're in the third period, neither team has scored, everyone's beating the shit out of each other, and then finally someone breaks through and scores. That's like the biggest like yelling moment, or the biggest your air has been sucked out of you moment
Yeah.
you can possibly get to is in sports.
Yeah. No, I have to agree. So I am remembering the last time I went to a Jets game, and it was nosebleeds, like in the balcony, and I think that they were like 150 a person.
Yeah.
And Winnipeg is really not the best example for like casual hockey going, because it's just like as soon as they came back to Winnipeg, it's like, all right, everybody and their grandmother has season tickets for 25 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, because you're Canadian. Literally, that's the whole joke of like, especially for like the Habs, is like, oh, if you get on the wait list, then maybe your grandkids will get some season tickets. Like,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I've always, just with the Preds, that's just always been my allegiance, and it's partially because it is local, but I just also like, I really grew to love that team, especially because when I first got into it was when we had, you know, Shea Weber, we had Mike Fisher, James Neal, Philip Forsberg was just getting in, Victor Arvidsson was just coming in, Pekka Rinne was in his prime, Carter Hutton was our backup, we had Ryan Ellis and Roman Josi had just come up from Milwaukee. Like, we were a very fresh and like aggressive team. We had Paul Gostad, who was just an asshole on the ice. Like literally, it was just so much fun to watch because I remember we literally we picked Cody McLeod up. Wait, what did we do for him? We traded some like a draft pick for Cody McLeod, and he, to anyone that's listening, is to say that he's a bad hockey player is incorrect because he's in the NHL. That level of skill is ridiculous. But in NHL standards, he's not like, and he knows it, he's not like the best player by any means. He's constantly going between minors and the NHL and such. But the dude, the year we got him, had the most fights in the NHL.
Oh, wow.
And we literally picked him up for the simple fact of like, let's get somebody on our fourth line to pair with, at the time it was like Austin Watson and Callie Yarncrook, I think. And I was like, let's just get somebody back there that like will just fuck somebody up for fun. And like the game, we got him from the Avalanche, and the next game was against the Avalanche. And who does he fight? I think it was Matt Duchene, actually. But like literally, like that was the era that I grew up watching the team, was like those formative years. And so like 2 years after I started watching them, we swept the Blackhawks, which was crazy. And the energy that filled the city with was just, you couldn't touch it with anything else. Literally, because Nashville's such a tourist stop that a lot of the time the big events are people that have nothing to do with the city. They show up for this, they act like dickheads, and then they leave. But like the vibe of the city, when even now when we go in the playoffs, is purely like a local pride thing that's so cool. And it's something that everyone gets behind, to like the restaurants making t-shirts that have like Preds and like in Preds colors or whatever, like that aren't even close to the arena, are doing it. So like, it's just such a cool, like that's just how it's been. And I think once the Nashville hockey crowd realized how different and exemplary they were, because it's basically just a bunch of rednecks that are around the ice. It sounds like you're at a high school football game the whole time. It's insane. It's literally insane. Yeah. And we had a guy I worked with was actually like our whole like host of the games. His name was Ryan. He went by Maverick. Okay. He actually was like the host for the Rangers at one point. But he said one thing that was very odd to him was when he came to Nashville is we are the only city that when we score, we don't cheer our team on. We tell your team they suck. And I was like, yeah, that's because, like I said, it's a bunch of rednecks that happen to find a hockey rink and they love it. So it's just a totally different energy than anywhere else you can go. Yeah. Aside from maybe Dallas.
Yeah. And yeah, it's definitely, I think Winnipeg is maybe special because we were one of those only like hockey teams that like had hockey, and then it was kind of like taken away from us, and it was just Don Cherry like slamming his hands on the desk being like, Winnipeg needs a hockey team. And then like, as you know, if there's anyone who's from Winnipeg who's listening and you didn't grow up wanting to own a Comeback Kid like spoof Winnipeg Jets shirt growing up, it's like you should turn off this podcast now and rethink your entire life. But yeah, like, seeing some of those like, hardcore metal bands like taking their hometown and using that in a sense to like, rep where they're from, like, kind of combining those two passions. And I've seen you guys do that a couple times. I hope that there's more, next time you guys are on tour, I'm sure that it's not just a one-off, that there's always thoughts and ideas about Predators Orthodox merch in the works.
It's just kind of hard because like the Predators aesthetic doesn't match Orthodox at all. It's like gold and blue and a tiger. Right. So like it just doesn't, like we've done it and I will happily do it again. It's kind of a risk to do on tour because not only are you going to other cities where people don't like the Predators, right, but also people who don't understand it are like, why is this saber-toothed tiger on your merchandise? Like, so that's kind of like what we, also 2 of our members live in Columbus now and don't give a fuck about hockey, but like, but yeah, I personally love when we do things like that. We had when we were on this last tour, actually, a tornado hit town, and it's pretty devastating. And we did a shirt that was this logo, which is very old, from like 2008-ish. And we put that with a black shirt, just said Orthodox Nashville, and used that to raise money to send to a charity foundation to help kind of rebuild the city, give aid, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the moment that we were able to finally get that money in our hands and turn it in, the world stopped. And so like there's still parts of Nashville that haven't been rebuilt just because they can't get any construction out there. So it's still pretty sad, but yeah, no, just to, again, very long answer for a very easy question. Hockey is one of my big passions. This year, I think I watched more of the playoffs than I ever did, just because there was nothing sports related on TV, and then suddenly it was like on the hour every hour. So I've really been getting invested in it. Yeah. I've become an Islanders fan, which is something I never thought I'd say. Yeah, I mean, but they're granted, Barry Trotz was our original coach. He's now their coach. And also
there's some ties.
Yeah. How do you feel about Dustin Byfuglien?
From what standpoint? Just in general?
Because he retired out of nowhere, and now he's suing the team for money because of an operation that he got outside of his contract.
Oh.
That he's saying they should have paid for.
Okay, so that's all news to me.
Oh yeah, he's like trying to sue the Jets.
Oh wow. Well, now any nice things I was gonna say about him, I'm gonna just bite my tongue. I think about when you guys played and you're like, I hate Dustin Byfuglien. I hope he. Oh, I don't know if you called that into existence. If you're like, I hope he leaves. And
he announced his retirement like the day before, or he announced that he was thinking of retiring like the day before we played. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I'm going to use that.
All right, here we go.
I was like, I hope he retires and never looks back. I hope you never see him play again. Mainly because that dude is terrifying. Yeah. Like that's one thing I hated about playing the Jets, especially when we played you guys in the playoffs. It was like we were playing the bullies, because I feel like the height minimum to be on that team is 6'5". You had
Tyler
Myers at the time too.
He's like
as well as Byfuglien
or something stupid.
Blake Wheeler, Line, even Hellebuck is like 6'6". Yeah. Like literally everyone on the team was just so big, and it just felt like we could. And of course, we traded our big guy Shea Weber for a fucking flop with PK Subban. So, that didn't help us at all. Yeah. But
all that's to be said. Hockey is sick. Hardcore is sick.
Yeah, we probably went a little too long on hockey.
No, it's totally fine. When I interviewed Lumpy from Sanction, we actually talked more about coffee than we did about music in general.
Oh, dude, that's actually great. We shouldn't get into that because I'm a huge coffee guy too. We'll end up sitting here talking forever. So.
Maybe that's a part 2 on a future episode.
Yeah, there we go.
Adam, the tail end section of the podcast that I always hit all my guests with is a favorite mosh story. So that doesn't need to necessarily be like, oh, from my moshing days. It could be something that happened at an Orthodox show, just a show you went to back in the day. Whatever is first off your head is how we say goodbye.
This isn't a story I usually tell, but for some reason this just popped in my mind, so we'll throw it out there.
Okay.
So Nashville is really and truly one of the one of the wildest cities. I don't want to call it the hardest because like there's not a lot of fights ever, but like it is truly a very tight-knit group of friends who will just do anything to each other. And so it gets pretty, I'm never scared because it's like, oh, if I get hit, it's going to suck. I'll get over it. But like, there's moments where I'm like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? And I think probably one of the most memorable things was Zack Witcher, my best friend, played in Orthodox. He is one of the best bassists I know. He's one of the go-to guys in the Nashville soul and R&B scene. he's a large guy, and he is truly like, people will be like, "Oh, are you gonna go down front?" They're like, "Nope, Zach's here." Like, literally the nicest dude, would do anything for anybody. I mean, really and truly, such a soft, genuine person. Just something comes out of him. And it was a tour that was years ago. It was before either of these bands really started peaking. Not peaking, that's not the right word. Started really revving up. Yeah. Was Jesus Peace and Vain. Vain was playing, and as you know, Vain has so many crazy twists and turns in their songs. There's moments where, like, if you aren't familiar with their music and you start like going for it, it's kind of a risk, because you're like, oh, you might just start doing something that doesn't make sense for you to do it to anymore. Well, Zach started really going in right as a Vain song was about to have a real sharp cut ending. And he did a spin, like a kick, that hit this dude in the head and knocked his head into the wall. Literally, like, song ended, and then Zach's foot comes flying, and you just hear this dude's connect and then hit the wall, and it thuds so it thuds so loud. But it was the moment that the song ends, so it's silence. You just hear boom, and I mean 80% of the room just goes ooh.
That's
when I tell you, I mean, Aaron Hurd was down there moshing with us, and he like fell over laughing. I felt so bad for this kid, because Zach doesn't wear light shoes. It's usually like fucking Tim's or something like that. I've gotten multiple black eyes from the heel of his boot. But like, I mean, literally thuds. It sounds like when you see a TV show and there's like a contact, but you're like, oh, that was definitely a sample, because there's no way that actually made that noise. Sure, yeah. That shit actually made that noise. That's how that was. To like hit so hard that this kid just bounced, and he went outside for a minute, and I was like, bro, you just like destroyed that kid. Like, I say kid, you destroyed that dude. And like, I mean, that's, for some reason, that's just what popped into my head, was Zack Witcher annihilating this person into the brick wall of the end in Nashville during Vain.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I appreciate that story and kind of breaking it down, because there, when I'm on stage, either filming a show or even a fest, there's so many times where, certain connects with people in the face, like line up exactly to like certain hits in the song, and I have this like little moment to myself, like, yeah, that's gonna look great on the video.
Oh, that's gonna look sick on there, yeah.
Yeah, but then Absolutely. To have it like publicly just dead silence, all I hear is like the loudest "kuh," and you just know that that's someone's skull just not shattering, but just not getting a little out of its element.
It's also, it was just so much worse, because like when Zach's going, that venue specifically is kind of narrow. Yeah. So like everyone in there is watching him for their own well-being. So they're watching his foot raise up about 6 feet in the air. Right. They're like, oh shit, that's high. Oh shit, that's loud. That's like where they were. So it's one of those where all eyes are supposed to be on the band, but there's certain moments where everyone knows it's not. That was one of those moments where all the eyes were there, and then everyone just heard just this home run swing of just a contact. Just
it's too insane. Too bad there wasn't like a professional movie effects guy just like having a long
sampling it,
boom mic to sample it. Yeah.
Yep.
You're like, oh, I got what we can use for this next Jackie Chan movie. It's just that.
I mean,
sample.
That shit might have picked up in the drum mic. I'm not even kidding. It was so loud. It was insane.
Yeah.
I know it sounds like I'm just blowing smoke at this point, but goddamn.
Yeah, no.
like
you were there, you witnessed it to tell the tale here. Adam, this has been a great conversation. Definitely.
I agree. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, I appreciate that. We've gone full bore on this podcast. But seriously, I don't say this to everybody. The bands that you're a part of with Orthodox and Youth Collapse, are just, I see both of those bands doing something different in their respective subgenre fields, and anything that I can do to help support that, in addition to just listening to it constantly while I'm walking my dog, is all good by me. Anything you want to plug, send people to after they're done this podcast, anything you want to do on that regard before we say ta-ta?
2 of the best heavy records. When will this come out?
Let's say roughly in 2 weeks.
Okay. So as of right now, 2 of the best heavy records of the year are up for pre-order. That is Your Receding Warmth by Boundaries and Cost of Living by Chamber. I have been fortunate enough to tour with both of these bands, grow very close with every member of them, and also one of the big personal perks of that is I've gotten to hear both of those records, and I can tell you, whatever you think you're about to get, it's going to blow your fucking expectations out of the water. And if you haven't listened to either of those bands, don't be that asshole that's like, oh, everyone's listening, I'm not going to. You're an idiot for doing that. Buy those records, support those bands. You're not going to be disappointed.
Yeah. That's some Nashville love. Giving the love to some other homies. Both of those bands, from what I've heard so far, have been absolutely insane. I'll give a little teaser. I actually might be doing a podcast with Matt from Boundaries. Is that his name?
Dude, this is so funny. He literally was like, dude, I've heard that name. Let me check my emails. And he looked through his emails like, I don't have anything from this, but I know I've heard of this.
Well, so funny.
Was it on Instagram? Or not on Instagram. It was on Twitter where you talked to him?
No. Well, okay. The real truth is, and maybe just before we did this podcast, this is like, I don't know if this will put in, but before we did this podcast, I did an interview with Zack from 30 Nights of Violence. So another Nashville metal band. And then
You'll See Me Up There is incredible as well.
Mm-hmm. And so their, I guess, like manager hit me up, and then like I checked my email today being like, yep, everything's set for that. And then he's like, oh, do you also want to interview Matt from Boundaries? So I'm like, we're just getting all this metalcore from Nashville on the podcast, which I am.
Well, Boundaries is Connecticut, but still.
Oh, sorry.
Was it Alec Cakebread?
Yes, Alec.
Yeah, that's the PR guy for Unbeaten. He is a real one for sure.
Yeah, shout out to him because I put 30 Nights of Violence and Speed on my playlist, and then he sent me an email. This was in June, and I only responded to that email like 3 months later because I never checked the scoped email. And he was like cool enough to be like, nah, like, let's do it. So shout out to him.
Hell yeah.
Shout out to Nashville. Shout out to Unbeaten Records. Shout out to you, Adam, for doing this. And I hope that once the world goes back to a new normal and we can have shows, it is high on my to-do list to get Orthodox up to Western Canada again, because that would be a treat for me.
Hell yeah, man.